So anyway, we're back with
All
another
right.
episode of Podcast of Mars. This is a continuation of our previous conversation about Star Wars. We kind of got out of the way previously, like whether or not Star Wars is Sword and Planet. It's not, but it's based on a lot of old Sword and Planet concepts. And it doesn't matter because, geeks of a certain age, including me and James, obviously, who doesn't love talking about Star Wars. And
Absolutely. And it's like a second cousin to Star Wars, so still in the family reunion.
Absolutely. So, we left off last time and we were just kind of talking about there was a lot of wasted story space. It seemed like if they'd have continued with Darth Maul as kind of like the primary antagonist or primary kind of servitor of the head Sith for those three movies, they changed it up every film. It was Darth Maul, it was Darth Sidious, and then you had General Grievous
It was
and
Count Dooku in the second one,
right.
and then the third one it was General Grievous. It kind of makes me wonder if you're talking about wasted time, wasted stories that were never going to go anywhere. And I wonder, has there ever been a successful prequel movie? Is it like something that was kind of destined to kind of have a problem because you've got everyone kind of wanted to see Darth Vader turn and become Darth Vader, right? Like, what was he like before? And that everything people really wanted to see was in that third installment. So it kind of made the first two basically, I don't know, like I guess like kind of like killing time until what. So on the last
Yeah.
one, I kind of mentioned, hey, like what if they started with what episode 3 was, and then you kind of can go anywhere with the story. But I do think it is a fundamental problem with prequels. If you know that it's going somewhere, you know how it's going to end. It really takes a lot of the uncertainty and drama out of the show or
Yeah,
movie.
yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's funny because, you know, I mean, like I said, I said last time, I was like, oh, I was a good boy. I took my medicine. I watched those first two movies. I was a loyal fan, and now let's get down to it. This is what we've been
Right.
waiting for. And honestly, to a certain degree, it gave me a lot of what I was waiting for. But I don't know.
Of
Yeah,
the three, it definitely got the closest. It was the closest to what we wanted when we first sat down in that theater, what, 1998?
yeah, yeah, and and there. I'm not saying I was completely unfulfilled. Now every now and again there would be something like when you had these droid armies, and I just remember one of them. It was kind of like a walking tank with like a Jack in the Box head with like a
Yeah.
long nose gun. I mean, some of that stuff was just ridiculous looking, and yeah, I'm not saying that ruined everything, but some of it was a little hard to take seriously.
I just couldn't help but like I remember the first time I saw episode 3 in the theater, and you see that like little spaceship kind of flying
mm,
about, and then like it goes over the big spaceship, and you see this incredible star battle underneath
mm,
it. And I was just thinking, gosh, what if in 1998 you sat
yeah,
in the theater and that came on the screen? That audience would have gone bonkers seeing
yeah,
that star battle to open the movie, and then Anakin flying around. Like if he had opened up with episode 3, flaws and all, I
yeah,
think it just would really be remembered differently. And I wonder if like the problem was he got in his head that it had to be a trilogy, because really it's just you just really needed one movie,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's because you're essentially telling a story the audience already knows. He's Anakin Skywalker. He turns to the dark side, and that's it. That's the story. And there was like a lot of preamble, but I guess I'm kind of belaboring that point.
well, no, I mean, you're right though. Here's the thing. A New Hope was episode 4. So I guess once that became a trilogy, it was sort of built into the DNA of the series that, oh, there's this whole other trilogy. But it was never really necessary. I mean, when people talked about like, oh, the film before the film, no one ever talked about like, oh, what happened in episode 1, what happened in episode 2. It was just there were rumors that basically the film before the film was supposed to be originally what was supposed to be called Jedi Knight or something like that, and you knew like certain core elements of it, Obi-Wan and Vader fighting on a volcano, etc. uh, I don't know that a trilogy was necessary, but once.
Well, and the trilogy was quite different. I remember there was an outline like in the 70s when Lucas would give these interviews. I think I've read this in The Secret History of Star Wars, which is a well researched, incredible book you can get on Amazon. Highly recommended on my part. One of the most fascinating Star Wars books I've read. But the original outline was for episode 1 to be like the history of the Jedi Order and how it was founded. Like it
Right.
really was very different from what we got in the Phantom Menace. Just out, and Lucas, you know, he didn't have everything mapped out at that point. You know, he had like more vague, broad strokes, and I think that kind of maybe that was part of the problem. You know, he was in a certain mindset in the 70s. Then he is the 90s, 20 years later, and he's like, okay, well, what was I thinking in the 70s? And he was a really different person at that point. So,
Well, yeah,
you know,
you
it's just
become
hard. You know, like there's guys like once in a while you get a guy like Jack Kirby who can create a million different ideas, but most guys are like Siegel and Schuster. They had Superman. That was their big idea. You
right,
know, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, they had the Ninja Turtles. That
right.
was their big idea. You know, it's just hard to capture that lightning in a bottle twice unless you're some sort of a one of a kind super genius. And I just think, you know, he was in his prime in the 70s as a creative person. That was probably the time to write those scripts.
Well, not only that, but also you become a victim of your own success. I mean, this entire apparatus is now built up around it. You know, Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects company that was created specifically because they had to invent all these new technologies just to do the Star Wars films. You have the toy company people want to make money, you know, the movie studios want to make money, and there's this entire kind of juggernaut that is built up around this one idea. And once all those other people get involved, no matter how much creative control you have, it's like, what do you mean it's not going to be a sequel? Of course it has to be a sequel. There have to be 3 movies. We can't just put butts in seats for 1 movie. We got to put butts in seats for
Right.
3 movies, you know? And
Well, you know what's interesting is I started reading a book called there's Taschen put out these books called the Star Wars Archives. They're like really expensive, like $200 each.
right,
And but then they later released like a $30 version. So that's the one I bought.
right.
And I just started reading the prequel one. I'm waiting for the original trilogy one to come in the mail, but I got the prequel trilogy one. I'm reading about the Phantom Menace, and it's just, you know, it's not the best one, but it's like one of those things where reading about the behind the scenes might be more fascinating than anything you saw on the screen.
Yeah.
And one of the things was when he first sat down with 20th Century Fox and told them, hey, this, you know, I'm ready to do another Star Wars. Of course, they were, yay. And then he's like, oh,
Yeah.
and the first one, you know,
Cha-ching.
Anakin Skywalker is going to be a little kid. They said they were not happy. And like when he told them about his like kind of ideas for the trilogy, they weren't happy at all. And he's like, and his attitude at the time was just like, gosh, well, I'm so glad I basically completely own the rights. They don't have any say in creating
Yeah.
it. You know, if it was a typical studio movie,
Yeah.
they would be able to kind of force what they want onto him, but he didn't need them for money. He's like, okay, you don't want to release Star Wars, I can find someone else that can release Star Wars. So they basically had to accept whatever he delivered. But it's kind of funny that the one time the studios might have been more on the rights, and now who knows, maybe what the studios wanted would have been worse than what Lucas did. We don't know. But the other thing was just the amount. I really have to hand it to him in terms of like, it's almost baffling that it failed because on a creative level, obviously financially, it did very well.
Right.
Because I was messaging you earlier about this today that it like they took every precaution and left themselves every out. So for example, usually with a movie studio, you have like a lot, you know, and you have to like share studio space to like build sets and all this stuff. Well, they had a setup where George Lucas was going to go to England. Originally, he wanted to build the sets on Skywalker Ranch, but I don't know how they somehow overruled him on that.
Right.
So he rented this like for 2 years, this abandoned stadium or something like that in England. And what was amazing about it was usually you build the sets, you shoot the scenes, the sets get torn down, that's it. But because he rented it for so long, they could build the sets and just leave them there. So they could film the
Right.
scenes,
Right.
go back, watch them, rewrite it, and then film them again. They had it built into the actor's contract. So it's just like, you know, so you think
It's
that,
crazy.
gosh, like how could this have happened then? You know, like you can watch the movie and be like, oh, this isn't good. Well, let's just redo the dialogue. Let's just, we've got these actors on the hook. You know, it just, and every actor was like, you know, they had as a quote in the book from Liam Neeson where the first scene of shooting, him and Ewan McGregor were like giddy. Well, you're like, we're in Star
Yeah.
Wars, you know, like they're so
Yeah.
excited. And just that's just a small taste. Like, I mean, Lucas really seemed like he took the technology he had available to him, and they were doing like brand new stuff that had never been done. Like now we kind of take it for granted, like fully CG characters talking next to human beings like that.
Yeah.
You know, not just like a dinosaur or a beast, but like an actual full character like Jar Jar Binks or Yoda or something like that. But at the time, you know, you kind of figured, oh yeah, this is a really, from a technical perspective, it's a revolutionary movie. They're doing special
Yeah.
effects that had never been done up to that point. But they were doing stuff like, we really like this shot of Padme talking to so-and-so, but I don't like the dialogue. We want to cut that dialogue. So they would digitally take like the lips off of her from another scene, put them on her, and then like run the audio. Like they were
Right.
able to do they basically seem to be able to do anything. So you think with that level of technology, with the creative freedom Lucas had and the ability to
Yeah.
reshoot things, reuse the same sets, yada yada yada. Now, there was one negative thing that was beyond his control. They went back to that desert where they filmed the original Star Wars, and if you remember
Hmm.
from the original making of Star Wars, like some of the sets were destroyed in a big storm.
Hmm.
It was like a storm. Well, 20 years later, like
Right.
a lot of the pods were destroyed. Yeah, like a lot of the sets were destroyed too. So that was one thing that was beyond his control. But it's just baffling to me. Like, how could it have been bad? Like when they could have done, they had so many chances to fix their own mistakes, which most movie makers don't get. Usually you film and you're stuck. If
Right.
something doesn't work, like crap, we got to try to fix it in editing. But Lucas wasn't in that position.
I don't know, man. I mean, it's like one of the great movie making mysteries of our time, I guess. Perhaps we'll never really know. I mean, because part of it's also, everybody wants to be involved in it. And then when it doesn't turn out to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, I'm sure there's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of armchair quarterbacking. We're doing some of it right now. But,
Yeah.
I mean, on the other hand,
Well, I would still like to say I do feel like there is more good than bad in those movies.
well, there is.
You
There
know,
is.
like I said last time, I watched something like Letters from Iwo Jima, which I found like an amazing, moving movie. I've
Right.
watched it once,
Yeah.
even though I think it's like a 5-star movie. Whereas I would give like the Phantom Menace 2.5 to 3 stars, but I probably watched it like 10 to 15 times in my life. There's just something that keeps you. I don't
Well,
know. Maybe it's the
part of it is that there's
milieu.
so much going on in it. I mean, and I don't just mean story wise, but there's lots of little details. There's things in the background. I mean, look, just like how I said, watching, for me, growing up with it as a kid, which was my experience, and it coming on, in the summers, the CBS, like, movie spectacular, like thing, and they would play, New Hope, and then the next night they would play Empire Strikes Back, like how that was almost like a ritual or a religious experience. I also grew up in a family where, it was like when the 10 Commandments came on, we watched the 10 Commandments, and we weren't necessarily a particularly religious family, but we liked these big sweeping movies with epic events and casts of like hundreds or thousands of people. And, like Ben-Hur, the greatest story ever told, all those kind of like really big movies. And when you watch them, there's just so much happening. There's all these little details, little
Right.
things in the background, little stuff with the
It's more
sets
like
or
a realized world.
right. And so that's part of why the films have a rewatchability, is that there's so much happening in it that, sometimes you can just kind of just sort of shut your mind off and just appreciate like all the little nuances and the little touches or whatever, like sometimes when I'm watching Phantom Menace and they're like going into, because it wasn't Mos Eisley when they first went in. It was like whatever the name of the other town was. And sometimes I'm not even paying attention. I'm just looking at like the weird shit hanging up in the butcher shop's like window, like the weird looking
Right.
fish and lizards or whatever that they were serving to people. Sometimes you're just looking at the strange alien writing, and I'm not like trying to figure it out. I mean, my geekdom only goes so far, but I just, little things like that, just little moments like
Yeah,
who's
that's what's
sitting
kind of
next to the
amazing
other
to me
guy.
too is that level of craft. Like for example, that you're talking about like these little details. You think like Jar Jar Binks, that weird way he talks. Like it wasn't like they just made up this weird way of talking. It's like Lucas, like they studied dialects and they studied accents and like they studied this stuff and they're like, we need to create a dialect for this character and the other whatever kind of alien race he was that isn't too similar to an existing dialect on Earth, and da 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 da, and it's got to have this and this and this, and then you listen to it, it's like that misa, oh, blah, 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 and it's so horrible, and you're so annoyed by it. But Lucas sat, I guess it's a personal taste thing, right? Like his personal taste was he sat down, he listened to that misa, this and that, and like watched those pratfalls and was like, I enjoy this. This is good, and he thought, I mean, they were really, you could tell before that movie came out, they were expecting Jar Jar Binks to be like immortalized the way Yoda was or something,
Mm-hmm.
like there was gonna be, or Ewoks, like there was just gonna
Yeah.
be, every kid was gonna want a Jar Jar plush, and for years on end, he'll be one of the most beloved and revered movie characters. And it was just like, I think he was probably flabbergasted at how wrong he was about that.
Well, I mean, kids have changed too, though. Like the kids in the 70s and the 80s are not the same as kids in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I'm not going to say that their tastes are necessarily more sophisticated, because quite honestly, there's a lot of dumb crap that kids like then and even that kids like now that I don't get. But tastes
Right.
and styles change, and just for whatever reason, Jar Jar Binks was just completely out of step with it. I don't know. I think that there were warnings. I think there were signs that maybe things weren't going to be quite as good as we wanted them to be, because I went and saw like the reissued ones, where they updated and they fixed things with the special
Yeah.
effects, and they kind of tweaked like little continuity errors and stuff. And there were definitely moments where I was like, I don't know if this gives me a good feeling. Like I think
I got a bad feeling about this, kid.
right. But I think it was probably most pronounced in by the time you get to Jedi. Like, okay, we're closing in on it. This is like the end of the reissued, updated, remastered, like original films. And I don't really care so much about whether or not the Rancor, or not the Rancor, but the Sarlacc has a beak or whatever. But that
Yeah.
whole awful kind of dance number in Jabba's palace,
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Like what?
it was terrible. And I mean, that's fine if you
What
wanted
was the
to.
point though?
I don't know. Because the whole thing is like originally that weird ass, like ugly alien size snoodles, just like blah, blah, bleep, blah, blah, blah. That's all you needed. You didn't need this whole big dance routine with the ugly kind of twitching, over rendered like CGI lips and stuff. I don't need to see the saliva dripping
Yeah,
down
those were
inside that
that
cartoon
CG
hairball's
was
mouth.
awful. I think those were like ways for George Lucas to like experiment with CGI
Sure,
technology
sure.
and like have it pay for itself
But it was
by
also,
releasing those movies.
yeah, but it was also like a warning. You know what I mean? It was like I look back now and I remember like sitting, and because that's one of my favorite parts of all the trilogies is that Jabba's palace sequence.
Oh
And
man, like that one is
the heroes are undercover, it's seedy, it's weird, it's kind of like
yeah,
this,
no, I mean to
you
me it's
know,
like you watch that opening sequence, it's like an extended James Bond opening. You think, all right, this movie's a home run already, you know?
yeah. And to insert this, I'm not even going to call it Disney-fied, but just to insert this like ridiculous like song, and I mean, and that's fine. A lot of those
You
old
know, it's
Hollywood
such an
movies that
amusing.
Lucas liked had these song and dance numbers, but why was it just so terrible? I don't know.
Yeah, it's so funny with the dance scene in Return of the Jedi because that's where like the first like chinks in the armor started happening for Star Wars. It was the one, they had Star Wars, Empire, both beloved, and then Return of the Jedi was a financial success. People have a lot of fond memories of it, but it definitely wasn't that universal praise that the first two got. And you're coming back to it 20 years later. Lucas is like, hey, I can finally make these movies, as he says, makes these movies the way I originally wanted them to be. And first thing he does is put in like this awful. That was the problem. Years over after all these years, people just complained to me there wasn't enough dance numbers in Return of the Jedi.
It's just one of those. It's one of many things that for me just borders on inexplicable. I just don't get it. Lucas loves old Hollywood. He loves old films. A lot of these old films have these dance numbers and stuff in them. They have these songs or whatever, but that doesn't mean well, thank you. That does not mean that you need to put that in like a space opera. You know what I
Right.
mean?
You can make a movie that has well that you're kind of leading me into what my next kind of point was, which again, I'm reading, the Star Wars archives for the prequel trilogy, and he said there were two stories basically. It was how a democracy can become, a fascist dictatorship. That was kind of one of and the other theme was how what was a fear of loss can like lead to, the Anakin Skywalker arc basically. I can't remember how he put it, but
Right.
it kind of reminded me of like Alan Moore when he talked about the Killing Joke all those years later, which he said, I thought I put, in retrospect, I feel like I these kind of funny old cartoon characters weren't built to handle the stress of the weight I put on them with some of the themes in the Killing Joke.
Hmm.
Like you don't want to do like a grim and gritty Mickey Mouse kind of thing. Now I don't think that these characters like Batman or Star Wars are as juvenile and I say this as someone that really enjoys Mickey Mouse comic strips and stuff, but for for a space opera like Star Wars, in the first Star Wars movies, black hats and white hats, was Star Wars the best vehicle to talk about the downfall of democracy devolving to a fascist dictatorship? Was he putting kind of themes that Star Wars maybe wasn't the best fit for that genre?
I think there's something to that, but I also think that he was attempting to provide too much nuance retroactively. I mean, if it had just been more like a coup and assassinations and subterfuge and people being bribed and spaceships blowing up or whatever with important people on them, and made it a little more classically adventure oriented, I don't think it would have been that big of a problem. But like you said, perhaps it was too weighty or too
well, his whole point with like the whole thing with the democracy, this is the one I kind of remember better, which was they it's not like like a violent coup or anything like that. Like you see in Star Wars, people voted for it to be that way. He said that historically that's what happens. There's a time of trouble and people like vote a strong man in to have like absolute power, to which of course he's going to give back, and of course he never does. And that's kind of what he wanted to show in the Star Wars movie. But just maybe the theme itself wasn't too hard, but like you almost feel it when you watch that Phantom Menace, and like, oh, there's a trade dispute on Naboo. It's like, and then they show like the Space Congress, and it just feels like, gosh, this isn't how it's supposed to be.
It's dull, and
right.
But you're right. I can even handle people voting it in, but the whole thing is that there was never a sense, and we talked about this last time, like the whole thing, like, oh, we'll disguise ourselves as refugees. Like, refugees from what? There was just never a sense that the galaxy was truly being disrupted to a point where people would vote in a strong man. It's like you never saw like whatever it doesn't have to be a Death Star or whatever, but you never saw the bad guys like obliterating a city with 1 billion people in it. You never saw like a planet full of people starving or dying from a plague or something. It's like it was all very engineered, and I'm not saying that it can't be. Crises are often engineered by people that want to exploit the trouble that develops from it. But I mean, you see what I'm saying. There was just never that sensation that like, the galaxy's teetering on the brink.
I started watching the Clone Wars animated series on Disney Plus. I've had them on Blu-ray for years, just never got around to them. But I guess the convenience of streaming has got me to watch them. And there was a 2-part episode called there's Jedi Crash and I think Defenders of Peace, and it kind of did some of that stuff you're talking about. Very, very well. I don't know if you watched that show.
Is that it's funny because a buddy of mine, we tried both getting into that, and I don't think I watched as much of it as he did. But the joke at the time when that show was, kind of more broadly available, not that it's not available now on Disney Plus, was that everyone looked like they were carved out of blocks of wood. And, so I don't know, just like visually, I had trouble getting into it.
Well, let me say this, just skip right to episode 13 and 14 and see, because that's the one where I was kind of just putting it on. I was like, well, I want to see Jedis. I want to see like, Star Wars type stuff. I watch all the movies 100 times.
Right.
And, I'm kind of watching it and just like, it's fine. Episode 13 and 14, where I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty damn awesome. And it kind of did what you're talking about, making the war feel like it had some real consequences, because basically, I guess I'm about to drop a bunch of spoilers on you, but maybe who knows, maybe we'll entice you to watch the show.
Drop them.
Which was, Anakin is injured. They have to crash land on this planet, and it's this planet of people who they're what's the word? Neutral. They don't want to get involved.
Neutral. What makes a man turn neutral, Kip? Is he born that way? I'm sorry, I love that.
I gotta watch that again. Futurama is so great.
Yeah. Go ahead. My bad.
Anyway, so the town elder, he's like, he didn't want to help the Anakin, even though Anakin was dying. And anyway, so like basically the droid army comes in, and the Jedi and the clone troopers are respecting this town's decision. Let's just get Anakin. Okay, we'll leave. It's not not right to drag them in. So anyway, the droids come in and they don't care that they're neutral. This is our colony now. and they were gonna, I won't give you any more spoilers. I think you should watch it because I think you'd really enjoy it. But it kind of really like, man, you kind of feel it. This is an innocent little town. Here comes these like droids coming in and just taking over the
Right.
town and stuff like that. It just felt like you could really it kind of started communicating some of those stakes, and you almost kind of wish that this series would have come out in between episodes 2 and 3, and then
Right.
by episode 3, I think you really would have felt more of the stakes. But it's a good show. I'm really starting to get into it.
Well, I'll check it out. I mean, we've got it available, so I might as well look at it.
Yeah,
But,
the what is the episode? I'll just look at it one more time here. The episodes of Jedi Crash, episode 13, and then episode 14, Defenders of the Peace, or Defenders of Peace.
what are you going to do, man? Because there's so much that I love. There's so, like, I mean, and even in the original, not just the original film and not just the prequels, even, the sequels, etc. I mean, I can go through and I can cherry pick all kinds of moments of things that I actually appreciate or really enjoyed. And, even in Phantom Menace, Darth Maul obviously is one of the standouts. He's really just a great visual, great concept. But I can even handle the Ben-Hur style chariot race. And I saw that thing you sent me where he mentions that, that is very definitely an homage to like Ben-Hur. But
I mean, even down to the two engines being like the two horses, which is
yeah, yeah, and I mean,
interesting.
but I even liked how not so much that Darth Vader created C-3PO, but I don't care about that. They explain that away with the memory wipe.
Yeah, I don't really care for that.
But I liked how R2D2 is introduced. There's just like 5 or 6 of them little dudes go up and start fixing and working on the ship, and all the rest of them are getting blasted and blown away, and R2 just happens to be the one. I like that. I like that. That was interesting to me. And
Liam Neeson was great in it. That
yes, yeah,
he was fantastic. And again, in that book I've been reading, Lucas talked about how he wanted like kind of a more veteran, calming kind of presence in the movie, the way that Alec Guinness provided for the original Star Wars.
but why didn't they do more Force Ghost stuff with Neeson afterwards? Was it like contractual problems? Was it he wasn't available because he was working on I remember like he broke his leg or he hurt himself or something, and that was one of the reasons why he wasn't really included or in it. But like the vocal cues were like every once in a while Anakin's having a nightmare or something, and you vaguely hear like Liam Neeson's voice like, Anakin, no, don't, but that's not enough. And I thought that was like,
it is. I don't know why they didn't do that, but I do know there's a deleted scene for Revenge of the Sith where Yoda before they go into hiding, Yoda tells
right,
Ben Kenobi that he's going to teach him how to commune with, I guess, ghosts, so he can talk to Qui-Gon Jinn. I don't know why that is. I mean, he was, it's kind of a shame because it's like him. I feel like Ewan McGregor is the standout of the original of the prequel trilogies.
Yeah.
But after him, Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn were ironically probably the most lambasted of the 3 movies.
Yeah.
Were probably the other big standouts. There really is a lot, just to kind of keep it on the positive, because I really, after a while, you almost start rooting for the prequels because they're so slammed. And I do feel bad for Lucas because he's just trying to make a cool movie. He just wants, kids to have like kind of that same feeling that he had when he was a kid and watched Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and all that good stuff. So I kind of feel bad for the guy, but there was good, I just watched Attack of the Clones. There's this, the whole thing with Obi-Wan visiting the clone plant and then fighting Jango Fett. And then they're having that fight in the asteroid belts. And then you have the gladiators. So there's really there's some really cool stuff in there. And actually I've seen, and what's funny about those movies is they're, the fan edits have been like a thing on the, out there for a while. It seems like that prequel trilogy is, I have to imagine it's probably the most edited of any movie. And I've actually seen, I can't recall which one I saw, but I saw an edited version that I thought it vastly improved all 3 movies. So it just makes me wonder, like, there's enough good stuff there. Like, I wonder how much a great edit would have made,
It made a big difference. But, I think Attack of the Clones was a step in the right direction. Yeah, it was not without its flaws, of course. there's a lot to like in all of the movies to one degree or another, and like you said, the prequels really do have this kind of kicked puppy status. So, you kind of want to stick up for them. There were definitely moments in there, just little things. I mean, I enjoyed seeing the nightlife and the kind of underbelly of Coruscant. I liked Camino because sticking with the themed planets that we talked about previously, Camino is this water world, and I thought the aliens had a unique look to them. I even liked the way the lab looked where they grew the clones. I mean, that was all quite suitable to me. I didn't have a problem with any of it. Even the whole weird.
I'd say with that one, it seems the big flaw is the romance scenes. If those romance scenes were either not there or a lot better, there wouldn't
Yeah.
really be a lot to complain about.
Well, fleeing to Naboo was definitely not a great choice to me. Like, I get it that they wanted to make it idyllic and romantic or whatever, but as long as you're disguising yourselves as refugees and fleeing to, go undercover or whatever, that would have been a good opportunity to introduce another planet.
Right. And then a lot of people say that danger creates romance, right? So
Yeah. Well, and that was also supposed to be part of it, of course. She rejects him or whatever, and then later when they go to look for Obi-Wan, and they're getting attacked by the three very different creatures. And I've talked about this with the superhero movies in the past, and we've discussed how it used to be you were desperate for things like just any kind of science fiction, any kind of superhero stuff, and now
right.
I'm at the point, I know that you're not there, but I'm at the point where I'm just, not, if not over it, I'm just kind of like glutted on it. I'm just like, okay, there's just so much of it. And there was sort of there's an embarrassment of riches with the Star Wars thing too. There's very much this, they forgot that sometimes less is more, because they're so used to overwhelming you with visual spectacle. They're so used to overwhelming you with all the little details. Like, we're going to have a gladiator pit scene where the heroes have to fight for their lives, and they're not just going to fight one monster, they're going to fight three very different weird looking monsters, and
Right.
just visually it was just not that there was a problem with any one of them. Hey, the weird hammerhead cat creature, hey, the crazy looking praying mantis thing, hey, the kind of rampaging wild bull dinosaur thing. All three of those by themselves are like very cool concepts, but then you throw them into the arena all together and it just sort of,
why are they fighting each other?
right, yeah, it just sort of loses something, and yeah, you can no prize any explanation you want for why they're not fighting each other. Dooku was controlling them mentally, whatever, but it's just, sometimes like there's this desperation to overwhelm you with spectacle, and
yeah, I mean, you kind of get that sense that, like you said, more is more. Like, we got to throw everything in the kitchen sink into this one. Like, on top of it, like, you see all those Jedi suddenly show up,
yeah,
and I guess it kind of creates that sense that, okay, so basically you've got like one Sith Lord and
right,
Jango Fett against like 50 Jedis,
right,
and like those little Roger guys are not intimidating at all, but an army of
no,
clone troopers. So just, yeah, you probably would feel more of a sense of danger if it was just the three heroes and they have to figure it out. Help's not coming.
But what you see, that's the
Yeah.
whole thing we talked about in the previous installment, that in a lot of ways Attack of the Clones is the cowboy movie one. So when those Jedi show
Right.
up, the cavalry, the cavalry's here, like, the cavalry's showing up, and that's the moment where the tide turns or whatever. And yeah, like, I don't even mind that. Like, hey, all the cool, weird looking Jedis and people running around, and what it was like.
I mean, I liked Sam Jack. I wish we could have seen a little more of Sam Jackson running around. I wish they would have given him like a character that really suited his strengths, obviously. But
yeah,
it just like if he was kind of like, like Jules from Pulp Fiction as a Jedi,
yeah,
man, that would have been awesome. He would have been like the Wolverine of the team.
Well, he had his moment, in Revenge of the Sith. When he finally goes to arrest Palpatine, that's when, again, you've taken your medicine and now you're finally seeing the characters do some of the things that you wanted to see them do, and
well, I mean, Mace Windu had that moment. I mean, Jango Fett got played.
Yeah, yeah,
Not even a
absolutely.
problem for Mace
No,
Windu to chop his
yeah,
head off.
absolutely not. You know, I mean,
I mean, you saw
but
how much trouble he gave Obi-Wan, and Mace Windu just like,
yep, yep. And you know, the funny thing is like, again, having some of like the things that I like Star Wars for, you know, like I want to see people riding weird creatures. And
right,
Jango
right, right.
Fett comes bursting up out of the ocean on the back of the flying manta ray pterodactyl thing. You know, Anakin and Padme are on the back of the weird, bull dinosaur
Bull.
thing. You know, I like that kind of stuff. And it
Yeah.
you know what, you have like the dewbacks from like New Hope, you have the tauntauns in episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, and then you had that weird freaky kind of cockatoo iguana thing from like Revenge of the Sith, and I loved that thing.
Oh
I don't know what
yeah.
it was, but it was just so crazy and weird, and that's kind of what I
What
want.
was weird about that one? I wonder if that was like a tribute to. Have you ever seen the original Buster Crab, um, Flash Gordon serials?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
at the beginning, like their ship crashes and these like giant lizards come out to attack them, and they're
Yes.
clearly just normal lizards.
Yeah. With weird shit
Like
taped to
like you're
them or
not
something.
fooling anyone. Like
Yeah.
that's what that lizard kind of reminded me of. They were the same type of lizards.
Hmm.
And like with Star Wars, they could have done anything. They could create some cool new thing. But it's like I almost wonder if Lucas just loved the audacity of like, no, it's just a big lizard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I kind of loved that too because it was just so weird. It had that strange kind of cockatoo, tropical bird kind of war cry or whatever it did. That was fun.
Yeah.
I liked all
It
that.
was memorable. It's like one of the most memorable things from that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know,
And hello there. I can't forget that.
well, yeah, there was just definitely trying to tie in and string along these trade federation guys and like all of their weird allies, like, yeah, I'm the banking clan and I'm the weird dude with the voice modulator that builds droids, or what,
Right, right, right.
these just kind of walk on guys that they're just not even necessary. It's
Well,
just,
they're it's kind of they're not only just not unnecessary, but they feel out of place. They just don't feel like Star Wars characters. They feel like cartoon characters that somehow are in this Star Wars movie.
yeah, yeah. It's just another example to me of like the wasted space, like the things that I wanted to see more of. Like if you could have seen less of those guys and like just even a few more, like a minute more on like all those different scenes where the Jedis were getting killed by the clone troopers,
Oh,
that would have been.
the original, like, or I don't know if it's the original, but one of the original earlier plans, like how Lucas had it scripted out, was it wasn't going to be like in one fell swoop they're going to kill all the Jedi's. What was going to happen was like Anakin Skywalker and Joe Blow Jedi go to a planet. Oh, only Anakin comes back. Like I
Yeah,
guess the other guy got killed in action.
yeah,
And it was supposed to be like where he's just like who's killing all our Jedi? It's a mystery, and it's really Anakin the whole time. He's
yes,
like doing it all from within. That was the original plan. And I thought, man, that sounds like a thriller movie right there, like
yes.
suspenseful. You don't know, and it just
Hmm.
seems like another one of those. It's interesting with Lucas. He'll have a brilliant idea, and in retrospect, oh, that's the idea you go with. But then he'll go with the idea that's not as good, and obviously in his mind, it's the better of the two.
But it seems like part of it is because of the expansiveness and the density of all the different characters and all these other storylines. It's like so much screen time gets eaten up by like these ultimately inconsequential things that you don't have the screen time available. You don't have the story time available to do a story like that. It has to be this kind of like, boom, like all at once kind of thing, because so much time is wasted talking about Palpatine's maneuverings in the Senate or whatever. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. I don't know. I just think ultimately, we've beaten this one to death. But just
I know.
starting,
I can't help it.
I know, but it really says something to what Lucas has created that we can't stop talking about.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the myth of my childhood. This is the fairy tales. This is like the American folklore of like the 20th century. This thing is the Iliad, the Odyssey, like whatever you want to call it. This is, it's our King Arthur, it's our Excalibur, and you know, Tolkien created Lord of the Rings because he somehow felt that like the folk tales and the mythology that Britain already had somehow wasn't suitable. He wanted this large, cohesive, like epic story that, you know, kind of encapsulated to him something about his particular culture. And in a lot of ways, that's what Star Wars is for us. It's just that it was delivered in such a way that I'm not going to say that it was flawed, but it was delivered in such a way that I guess I was programmed to want it, but I was not like prepared to receive it in the manner that it was given to me. You
Yeah.
know?
You know, it's just one of those things, you know. I hate when people. It's a pet peeve of mine when people whine about something ruining their childhood. You know.
Oh, it didn't ruin my childhood
So,
because they
but
can never take away those
right,
films and
that's
those
my point. It's like you
experiences.
had those great experiences. He gave you something of childhood. Maybe he gave you a bad movie experience in the theater. That's all he gave you,
Whatever.
and
Yeah.
you probably had worse ones.
No, you were saying that we kind of beaten into death, and I didn't want to do that with this. You know, we spent a lot of time kind of deconstructing and dismantling things, especially in the previous episode. And I did want to try and focus more on the things that I liked or the things that I appreciated. I love all the weird riding of the weird beasts. I like the different ships and stuff like that, the different environments. You know, I like that, like what Utapau was like this weird kind of, the planet was just this big thing with like lots of like sort of wells or something, you know, and it was like inverted. You went down into this kind of terraced like interior structure of the planet. You know, I even thought it was neat seeing the Jawas without their robes on, you know, because like how they come running out to gas up like Obi-Wan's ship or whatever, and they're making those Jawa noises. Hey, that's what they look like when they're not wearing their
I don't
black
remember
armor.
that.
Yeah, they come running out and they have like, you can tell because they have like the weird kind of looking eyes that you only saw in the
Which one was
robes.
that in?
It was in Revenge of the Sith when he lands on Utapau and he lands his ship and he gets out to talk to the big, tall,
Yeah,
stately,
yeah, I know
like
exactly what you're talking about.
weird looking alien. And that guy's great. You know,
Yeah,
Mad
he
Max
was good.
Beyond Thunderdome, you know, Road Warrior. He even played Zedeckis Zorander in this awful, awful adaptation of some fantasy novels that I read that was on TV called Legend of the Secret. He's great. But he kind of like snaps and points at the ship, and a couple of, you know, robeless like Jawas come running up to plug it
Ah,
in like that. You know, that's neat. That's like a nice little touch. That's a neat Easter egg. I
got to see the
liked,
Wookiee planet, you know, finally.
yeah, you get to see the Wookiee planet. You know, you get to see their kind of, you know, what is it, Roger Dean Yes album cover sort of stuff. You know, and there's a lot of like great little moments in there. I
I
mean,
mean, the scenes with Anakin and Obi-Wan at the end, you know, that final fight and the scene of
it was
him burning
good.
up, you know.
Yeah, it was good. I
That
liked
was
all
like
that.
that was what people paid their money for in 1998 when they went in to see that.
Mhm.
People were dying for that scene, and he did not disappoint in delivering that scene.
No, no, not at all. Like the killer for me is that I'm a big Christopher Lee fan. You know, I've been watching him since I was a little kid, and he would, you know, he played Dracula in all those Hammer horror films. You know, I've been watching him since, you know, The Wicker Man and Satanic Rites of Dracula and all that kind of stuff. So I love that he got this chance to where he's not only in Lord of the Rings, but he's also in this other major, you know, kind of modern
Yeah.
myth. And he makes a pretty good showing. You know, he's
Well, you
Christopher
know,
Lee.
I think there is a way that he could have been like, let's say in the first one we see Palpatine, right? And he's like, my
Mm,
new apprentice, Darth Maul. What if Palpatine was just totally in the shadows? So you don't even see him being like
yeah,
Darth City. And it's Count Dooku. You know, he's the one. Oh, this is my apprentice, and it's he's positioned as like, oh, this is guy. And then the audience is like, well, where does the Emperor come in? Does he turn into the Emperor? What happens to the Emperor?
right,
You know,
right.
because the way it's presented, we already know that they got the same actor that played the Emperor, so we already know that dude's gonna be the Emperor. Like, I don't know if they got a different actor or if they made him up a different way. I don't know, but they could have had it where we don't really know that Palpatine is going to become the Emperor until the third act. He's the Sith Lord. So you have
Yeah,
Dooku presenting Darth Maul. You never have Grievous, right?
yep.
And then on was that Utaped or whatever you said? That
Utapau or whatever.
what
Yeah,
if that's the final battle between Darth Maul and Obi Wan?
yeah. I'd have loved it. I mean,
Darth Maul was the one on the ship. When at the beginning of the movie when Count Dooku is killed and he escapes. You know what I mean? Like, there's things that could have been. This is all, of course, Monday morning quarterbacking.
right, right. Of
Like,
course.
I guess that's the thing with the prequels. They feel like, even though they're finished movies that have a lot of great things to them, they almost feel like first drafts. even though I'm
Yeah.
sure they were done many times. But you look at those movies like you're almost there. Let's just remake these movies and fix those problems, and you'll have an all-time classic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, because that's the thing. I just like keep wanting to come out. Like, what is it that I like? Like, what is it that like really like draws me in about it? And Attack of the Clones, it's like they kept getting progressively better. By the time you got to Revenge of the Sith, it's like, okay, this feels like a Star Wars film. And then the sequels, we talked about them a good bit in the previous episode, but they had a lot of great stuff too. They had a lot of strong visuals. I think everybody loved the stormtrooper with the weird, crazy, jackknife kind of pile driver thing that blocks the the lightsaber. Kylo Ren like holding the blaster bolt in
Right.
midair.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, I even like the whole weird kind of mineral planet where they're flying the beat up like bee wings and they're like scarring up the surface, leaving these red trails behind.
Right.
And there's just all these different little moments where there's like really, really cool stuff. So there's like a visual feast, and then there's always like this opportunity for imagination, because that was the appeal of the Kenner toy line back when I was a kid. Was you watch the movie, there are all these characters in the background, they make a figure, they make like a little idol, a little fetish,
Right.
a little kind of statue of this particular spirit or god or whatever, and you get to own all of these. And like, what's this guy's story? What's this guy's story? What's this guy's story?
Right.
And of course, like the super fans, they can tell you what these guys' stories are, because the whole expanded universe of all of those paperbacks and books, which I was just into other stuff at the time. You know what I mean? So like, but I had all those friends that were into all that. Like when I was playing D&D, my other buddies were, the ones that weren't my D&D buddies were playing the Star Wars role-playing game. When I was reading like other science fiction novels, they were reading the expanded, Star Wars universe stuff. Even Bill read a few of them and tried to tell me about some of it. Like one of them's called Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, and it's like literally stories about all those other weirdos that are in the bar. And that's what you like. You like to be able to look at the stuff and like, oh, what's that guy's story? What's his deal? What's his trip?
Yeah, that expanded universe stuff, it's funny at the time, it was really like a big thing. You just I always had the feel like this is fan fiction essentially, even though it's made by professionals. Right. This isn't real. Like the stuff in the movies is the real Star Wars. And then Disney basically just kind of confirmed that by saying everything that's not the TV show and the movies is basically thrown away now. Or doesn't count.
But part of that's also though, because now saying that, and now that they've established this new canon with the prequels and with the sequels,
right?
Now they get to have like a whole horde of like, hell, they might not even have authors doing it anymore. They might have some advanced AI writing the shit. But yeah, you know what I mean?
How Star Wars would that be?
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying, but now they get to issue a whole new slew of paperback novels of like, no, this is the official expanded canon.
Right. So that's kind of my next question was like, okay, we've spent like, a lot of the last episode, all of the last episode, a lot of this episode looking backwards, now Star Wars is at this point. So even though the new trilogy's made a ton of money, and the only one that really stumbled was Solo, but that was enough of a stumble for them to like just pump the brakes on. They had so many movies in development, like Marvel style. And like, we got to pump the brakes on these. And they went solely to like Disney Plus shows, which were like a bit much better received than any of the movies in terms of critical reaction. But they are saying, hey, we need to like start. They want to kind of slow down like the volume of Marvel content and like start picking back up the theatrical Star Wars content, because you're letting this IP that people really love and want. So you're Kathleen Kennedy now, right? Where do you take it from here?
Well, they did a little bit of it in The Mandalorian, where they started like, to me, it's like you got to pick the most interesting characters that are not heavily relied upon, like in the stories.
Right.
So sometimes it's just going to be a visual. Sometimes it's going to be like a character that's just a little off to the side. And I think part of it would also be picking stuff that is not necessarily integral to the main overall, story arc. And so they did that. So they did that with The Mandalorian, and specifically some of the characters that I'm going to reference, which is when you see an Empire Strikes Back, like bounty hunters, we don't need those scum. Though
Right.
that's a cool looking group of dudes.
Right.
You got Bosk, who's kind of like this weird lizard looking guy. You got Dengar, who's got like his head all wrapped up in rags and, whatever. You have Boba Fett. You got the tall, like Hal looking like I kill humans robot, like that.
Right.
And that's the kind of people that you should focus on, because you just look at those guys and they've all got stories. They've all got stories in them. And you have like a different group of people, like different personalities or whatever. And I think it would be more like utilizing characters like that.
I do think though that you need Jedis, you need stories about Jedis. I think the problem is they don't have to be related to the Skywalkers. I
No,
think
they don't.
the Skywalkers have to be the past at this point for Star Wars. And then, I think they need to make Jedi movies, but I think, originally my thought would have been, oh yeah, Knights of the Old Republic. But then again, you run into that prequel problem where like, well, eventually all these guys are gonna get wiped out in, the prequel trilogy. So I think you start like, Rey's established the new Jedi Order. You could have Rey in there, but you basically have to move forward now. Like, who are the new Jedis? What are their new stories? And kind of create a new saga.
I think that they have started to do this to a degree, because here's the thing. The most important thing that the Obi-Wan series did was it established that not all the Jedis were killed.
All right.
Obviously the younger ones, weaker ones, people that they thought could be turned or whatever, these people were gathered up and kind of inducted into this like order of flunkies that obviously work for Vader. And these people have force powers. These people know how to use lightsabers, etc. So once you've established that those people are there and that they're hunting down like the remaining Jedi, that means you've established that there are other people out there and other stories that you can tell that have nothing to do with the Skywalkers. And I think you're going to see more of that as time goes on. I mean, that, it just makes sense. Ahsoka Tano, obviously they've got
her
plans
show's coming
for
out this
her,
year.
right? So they're moving in that direction. And I think that that's a necessary step. But the funny thing is that means that they've jettisoned one of the, not odd, or I won't even say it's bullshit, but like this whole he who brings balance to the Force.
Right.
We've never accurately, and that's the great thing about a prophecy, is because they're vague and they can be interpreted in different ways. Because that never made sense anyway, because like, how are you bringing balance to it? Is it that there's only 2 Sith, so eventually all the Jedi have to be killed, so there's only 2 Jedi? Or
well, there's Obi-Wan and what was it? It was Obi-Wan and Yoda, and then it was the Emperor. And even though Obi-Wan series shows that there's not, but assuming that, like, let's say they were all killed off, so you got Obi-Wan, but then Luke would be like the one. I don't know.
See, that's what I mean. It doesn't, but that's okay, because they've jettisoned.
Well, even in the prequel trilogies, Mace Windu was like, maybe we got the prophecy wrong. Maybe it's been misinterpreted. Or Yoda says misinterpreted it has,
right. And and that's good. They've jettisoned that, because that opens up the story opportunities to have these Jedi like tales that you're talking about that don't require they don't require, I feel like, more stuff that it comes out. It's going to be a little bit more like the Mandalorian. I think it's going to be within a time frame to where the Empire still exists, or it's just like been defeated and is starting to fall apart.
Right.
I think that the whole New Order and the New Republic and all that kind of stuff, I kind of think that's going to be avoided now as well. I think that it's going to be, there's this sweet spot in the timeline where most of the stories are going to occur, and they'll be happening kind of like simultaneous to, in the background of, or just after the primary 3 films that we think of.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because you kind of, I was watching the Clone Wars, all the Clone Wars happen between episodes 2 and episode 3. And I'm just like, gosh, I sure wish there was like a, I don't know, Rebel Alliance show between episode 4 and episode 5 before he discovered, kind of in that Russ Manning, Al Williamson era of like comic strips. So and Marvel Comics had their series going on, and that was like when it felt like the most fertile. You could do so many more things within the Jedi's, within the Star Wars universe. So I'm definitely down with that. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, the bounty hunters was just my first thought. I
well, the
mean,
thing is that like all those ideas seem like they're good for any like a Disney Plus show. What could be a movie though? Like what's going to carry a movie? Because don't
what's
they have
going
a
to
show?
carry a
Is
movie?
Bad
That
Batch about those bounty hunters?
No, Bad Batch is about like a group of clones that, I guess they're like the
Oh,
dirty dozen of the clones, kind of.
gotcha.
I mean, what could carry a movie? Well, that's a big question. I mean, like personally, you know, you
And
know,
I know what could any movie could be good.
yeah,
I don't need all the spectacle, but we know how the game works in Hollywood. You know,
right,
they're going to go for they're not going to go for the quiet, thoughtful, you know,
right,
psychological thriller. They're going to go for the Avengers Endgame type deal.
right.
Um,
Like Caravan of Courage, the Battle for Endor.
right,
Yeah.
the ones that get the blood pumping.
I
Right.
mean, like, here's the thing. I would be remiss, like, since we are doing a Star Wars podcast, I just have to say this because it's like obligatory that I have to. I got to mention it just even when it crosses my mind, right? Like, I was organizing some files in my computer the other day, and just trying to get some of my written stuff in order. And I saw a file, and I'd almost forgotten about it. I saw a file, and it was just called Gonk, Gonk,
Mhm.
right? And I was like, Gonk, what the hell is Gonk? What did I write? And so I open it up, and what it is at one point, this was definitely a few years back. I think this was, I can't remember if it was around the time of the prequels or if it was around the time of the sequels about to come out, but it was, you remember where it was going around the internet where people were talking about how they're so desperate to pimp out and prostitute the entire Star Wars IP. It was an image of that Gonk robot, the box with legs, and
Okay.
it's like kind of standing looking up into space, and there's like lightning behind it, and there's a logo, and it says Gonk, a Star Wars story. and like people would always talk, like, this image would just pop up on the internet, it would pop up on social media, and for whatever reason I wound up typing the same response to that Gonk post so many times that I just finally got sick of it. I just typed it up and saved it so that
Right.
I could like post it whenever like someone posted that picture. And it's like, they're like, because people say, well, yeah, but what would the Gonk movie be? And it's like, well, it's simple. The Gonk movie is on Endor after the like fall of the Empire, and the stormtroopers have all been killed, and the Ewoks are like drinking soup out of their helmets or whatever. Like, a rapacious gang of space raiders comes in to exploit the planet. It's got all these huge forests. There's probably rich in biodiversity or whatever. So they come into whatever just to steal the planet. There's a big aftermarket for like Endorian hardwood, like on some other planet where they want fancy
Right.
wood paneling. And so they come in and they're like, executing Ewoks and killing them like right and left. And the Gonk is always like sitting in the rain watching the happy little Ewok families prior to like the invasion. And he's like an outcast because he was a power droid. Like they're just like these walking batteries, and they plug shit into them so they can like
Right.
charge like the machines. So he's like spit upon and run out of the villages, and they throw rocks at him and paint like nasty Ewok graffiti all over him until like the guys come in to take over the planet and abuse them. And eventually Gong and Ewok fall in together, and they find out that if they plug some of the old Empire like war machines into Gonk, they charge them up. And now you got Ewoks on speeder bikes and Ewoks and chicken walkers or whatever. There's a whole
Right.
big battle. They fight, they kill, they run off the invaders. And at the end of it, Gonk's happy. He's one of the tribe. The Ewoks put a little poncho on his box like body, and yay, yub, yub. It's, and so
That's a
like,
good. Yeah, there you go.
yeah,
I'd watch that movie.
right. So
Uh,
there you have it.
I guess, yeah, I just looked it up on my phone. I guess if you're interested, go on to YouTube. There's apparently these fake trailers for Gonka Star Wars story.
Are you shitting me? All right.
Yeah, I guess
Now
afterwards you'll have to check them out.
I will. I will. Because that was my pitch for the Gonk movie. So like that's my elevator pitch. I'm in the elevator with like
Hey,
Kathleen Kennedy, and
yeah, hopefully she'll hear it because
yeah, just give me about
I'm
$10
into
million
it.
and I promise I'll never bother you again.
Only 10 million.
Right. I'm not going to make the movie. I'm just going to take 10 million and run.
Right. Yeah. Well,
But
that would just cover catering on one of their movies.
But and that's the thing though, is that like like you said, any kind of movie could be made. Obviously, it's not going to be a lot of quieter, sort of stuff. But
Yeah, but your point earlier about like the characters that because I when I started watching Mandalorian, you love it, right? You're
yeah,
like, gosh, I kind of wonder why they didn't, John Favreau just didn't make this a Boba Fett show. And then
yeah,
obviously the next thing you think of is, well, there's a lot of baggage there already, people.
yes,
And then you
yes,
saw when they gave Boba Fett a show. I'm only a couple episodes into it, and so far it seems good enough.
yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, but it's just like it's a problem, And I wonder if it's just because it's got the Boba Fett, like if it was a different bounty hunter and it was a unique character, and you didn't. So it's almost like these characters are they have so much baggage tied to them that you have to create like a new character, like the Mandalorian,
Right.
um, or like a new type of Jedi. So yeah, I think that's the right track. Is just still like, and to me, that's the thing. Is um, you mentioned earlier about Darth Vader building C-3PO. It's making the Star Wars universe smaller. We talked about it in the last one,
Hmm.
and that's just like,
Hmm.
gosh, everything's so incestuous and interconnected. And I think when you have a Milio, I don't know how that's pronounced,
I
but
don't know.
when you have something that massive, it's just like, why do the same? And that's why I like those Russ Manning comic strips. Like literally every storyline, it's like a new planet. They're new characters.
Yep.
Luke's falling in love with a new girl. Han's meeting up some other character from his
Hmm.
past. It's just like you get the feeling that there's this whole world out there to be explored and discovered, and you're along for the ride, and it's great. Whereas with like a lot of these movies, are just everything's so self-referential. You don't
Yeah.
feel like you're. It's like.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why The Mandalorian was fun, because even though it was revisiting, some places that you'd already been, it opened things up. It's new characters, it's things being presented in a slightly different way. I mean, there's obviously a certain reverence for everything that's come before. There's little Easter eggs and callbacks or whatever, but what I can't even remember the Mandalorian's actual name, like Jin Djarin or something like
Something
that.
like
But
that,
like,
yeah.
but the thing is like, I don't have to worry about my expectations. I don't have to worry about being let down, because I have no idea what the Mandalorian is. I haven't imagined his adventures,
Yeah, that's
but
true.
like, when it comes to like Boba Fett or Revenge of the Sith or whatever, it's like it can't compete with like what I'm imagining in my mind.
That's funny. The Jack Kirby, he never liked to do. He didn't want to do Jimmy Olsen when he went to DC, and then
Mm-hmm.
even characters he created, like he didn't really want to do Captain America when he went back to Marvel. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, and his reason was, because you're always competing with the preconception in the reader's mind. If I do a brand new character like Orion, like no one's ever seen him before, they can't tell me I'm wrong because they don't even know what it is. Whereas if I
Right.
if I do, Jimmy Olsen or some other character that's been around, like it's like, well, you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it the way it's supposed to be done.
Well, so saith the king. So let it be written. So let it be done. If anybody knows what they're talking about, it's Kirby.
Yeah, I mean, and he's not wrong. I mean, that's
No, he's
that's the
not.
double-edged sword of these IPs. They have that built-in audience. People want to see the further adventures of their favorite characters, and it's hard to get a new franchise character, whatever you want to call it, off the ground. But you run into that, like people have like a preset. There's a certain, Empire Strikes Back is a great movie. And you've set that standard. So now
Mm-hmm.
every Star Wars movie that comes after those first two movies were so great
Yep.
will always, unless you just hit a home run. So that you basically got to be better than those movies to like really get on the board, basically,
I mean, that's a really high damn bar. You better bring your pole vault stick, because it's like,
Yeah. So
wow,
I mean, they're
you
kind of in a
know,
no-win situation with this, but I think
yeah,
what you're saying with like, don't try to outdo them then. Just do something like The Mandalorian,
right.
create some new characters,
Yeah, do
show us
gunk.
other corners.
I mean, yeah, and the thing is, I know I keep coming back to it, like just taking the piss out of it, but it's like, yeah, Caravan of Courage, the Battle for Endor. It's like, as ridiculous as that sounds, that's the whole thing. Like, who the Ewoks are, but because the Ewoks are just like these cute, cuddly, like alien teddy bears or whatever, you can introduce like whatever other characters you want to interact with them. Like it just, it doesn't require you to go back and check the encyclopedic big fat ass series Bible to make sure you're not contradicting something or doing something that doesn't make sense. Like,
Well, like you said too, it's like, and it's not like the Mandalorian is just out of left field. Like it's a totally original concept.
right.
He looks like Boba. It's essentially a Boba
Yeah.
Fett like character, but and I think that's why doing the Ahsoka Tano show is a good idea too, because she does have some established history in the Clone Wars, but most people probably haven't seen
Right.
the Clone Wars or seen all of them or even remember all of them. So like you got a character that has, okay, this character knew Anakin Skywalker, this character fought in the Clone Wars,
Mhm.
but there's not, she has a really cool visual.
Yep.
They can really go any which way they want with that thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that could be done. I mean, even if you just whatever, I mean, you can take like any particular setting, and they always go back to Tatooine, and that's because, well, it's a desert, and plenty of desert to film stuff in. In a desert environment is probably an easy environment to recreate, computer generated wise. But I'd be interested in seeing stuff happen in Cloud City. I'd be interested in seeing, what I mean? Because there's great locales and great environments, but and then even then, just working with that theory of like, okay, there's a desert planet, there's Cloud City, there's a water planet, with the clone dudes on Camino or whatever. There's Mustafar's, this volcanic moon, Endor's a
They could get
forest
more
moon.
ambitious with some of their. I know this might
Yeah,
sound totally out of left field, but like I was watching like the trailer for the Super Mario movie,
right,
and like it's so fantastical and alien. They could, or like another one that comes to mind are some of the background paintings in the Masters of the Universe show were so like
right.
the trees look so far out, the color of the terrain was like
Hmm.
purple, like it was just very alien looking, and it's like, why should they be like, I think we're at a point with Star Wars where like we've seen enough desert planets, we've seen enough forest planets. I agree that Cloud City is something that they definitely have not done enough of, but like we've seen these environments for, so like, yeah, let's open it up a little more. You
Well,
got CG.
I know that it's slightly a tangent, but you make an excellent point. Those background paintings and backdrop paintings for Masters of the Universe were incredible. As crummy as that
Yeah,
cartoon was on like a lot of other levels, those background paintings, the alien terrains, the weird looking plants, like
the music too.
yeah, I mean, that's really strong stuff, but that's a great point to make. They could really be doing more with some of these environments. You know what I mean? I was just going to be silly. I was just going to say, like, I don't give a shit. Go to the cactus planet. Go to
Well,
like,
the other one that comes up is the terrain of Avatar. It's a jungle
yeah,
planet, but look how much more interesting it was than any Star Wars
yeah,
terrain.
yeah. So you've got all of that, and they'll do more with it. It's impossible for them to not do more with it because there's too much money has been sunk into it, but also the potential for return on investment. The revenue that can be generated by this IP will be, barring like the complete disruption of our civilization, way of life or whatever, it'll continue producing money for another 70, 80, 100 years probably. I mean, and that's
Depending
why,
on how they
yeah,
run with it, right?
there was one theory that I wanted to maybe discuss or touch on a little bit, and it's just because it's a pet theory. Other people have brought it up amongst like the numerous influences that exist on Star Wars, but the Wizard of Oz connection, I don't think that can be
No,
easily
I don't
set
know it. So
aside.
let's
Yeah,
we'll finish off the episode with the Wizard of Oz
yeah.
connection. And
All right, so I feel like this is a theory that has a lot of legs. Um, because obviously, much is made about Lucas's variety of influences and the different things that he borrowed from to create the series. We had talked in the previous episode about the archetypes that the characters represent, and then I made a little bit of something about the different personality traits of the primary three protagonists, Han, Luke, and Leia. And this ties into that somewhat because the Wizard of Oz / Star Wars theory basically goes something along the lines of and it might not be immediately what you think, because originally I'd said like Luke is kind of like innocent optimism, Han is kind of like jaded cynicism, and Leia is sort of like like a take charge practicality. But if we line up not just those characters but a few other ones a little bit more, we see like a parallel to some of the other character structures in Wizard of Oz, which is that Luke, who must unlearn what he has learned. If only his mind is where he was, what he was doing. Luke is the Scarecrow.
Okay.
Right? If he only had a brain. Han is the Tin Man. If he only had a heart. Right?
Okay.
I mean, literally right down to being frozen in carbonite, the same way the Tin Man gets rusted up and then has to be oiled up and like released.
All right. When you first suggested me, I figured the C3PO was the Tin Man because of his like little
Well,
movement.
you see, well, that's what's funny, right? Is that, we talked in another podcast at one point about how Chewbacca is kind of a big dog, but he's not Toto. Chewbacca is, of course, the cowardly lion because he's big, he's aggressive, but then think of all the times like, I don't care what you smell, get in there, like
Right.
Chewie's always like, he doesn't want to do it. He's kind of, cowering back a little. So Chewbacca is the cowardly lion. And then you would think, oh, well, that means that Leia is Dorothy, but not really. Leia with the bun hairdo, and there have been different sources cited for where that hairdo came from, not least of which is the female Mexican revolutionaries during, like, I think the Zapata Revolution in Mexico.
I just read in that Star Wars book that it was from like a Native American tribe.
Right. Well, here's the thing, though. If you also look at some of the old illustrations, the original illustrations that were drawn for Frank L. Baum's Oz books, Ozma, the Princess of Oz, and the Art Nouveau illustrations that go along with the stories has that kind of two buns on the side of her head hairdo. So if she's not Dorothy, then who's Dorothy?
Give me 1 second. No Place Like Home. Is it Obi-Wan?
Obi-Wan, if anything, would probably be more like the wizard because he kind of gets people started on the adventure.
Yeah. I guess that you're really not leaving me with a lot of characters that have to say either C3PO or R2D2.
It's C3PO. C3PO is Dorothy and R2D2 is Toto. Because if you think about it, you see them early on in the film, the ship chasing the other ship, and they hear the docking noises or what have you, and they're kind of always there right from the beginning, the taller figure and the shorter figure. And C3PO is like the teller of our tale, and they're always accompanied by, obviously Dorothy is not as annoying as C3PO, but it's there. It's actually there. If C3PO is Dorothy, R2D2 is Toto, right down to his name, R2D2, Toto, Toto, R2D2. And then in addition to that, Cloud City has a very Oz vibe to it. And then after the visit to Oz, in Wizard of Oz, the characters have to go into the witch's castle in the land where she rules, and the underworld or kind of infernal elements of like the industrial portion of Cloud City have like a very like dark, menacing, evil castle sort of vibe to it. Vader is the witch. There's that black silhouette, black cape, flies around. There's something there. And then in addition to that, and I've actually tried to find clips to where I could play them side by side. The noises are not precisely identical, but when they're on Endor in Return of the Jedi and they get caught in the net, right? And then the net collapses and they fall to the ground. When C-3PO sits up, the noise that the Ewoks make is actually somewhat similar to the noise that the Munchkins make when Dorothy sits up. You know what I mean? So there's definitely there's something there to that. And I think that the Emperor, of course, has his big like floating head, and that has a very big floating head like in Wizard of Oz. There's something there. There's something to it. And I think that Oz is magical. Oz has a lot of archetypes in it, but not only that, but Oz is a particularly American fairy tale. It's not connected to the old world fairy tales in that same way that Star Wars, it is somewhat, but it's its own thing. It's an American myth. And I think that there's some, you can really like go through it. And I love the Wizard of Oz books. Like I own several of the original ones. I don't know if I own the entire series, but I own enough of them and I've read enough of them that there's some other like odd things that kind of occur to you, like the Geonosians. the way that they're described being, the way that they look, spindly, winged, kind of brown colored. I'm trying to remember what they were called in the Oz books, but they were called like earth sprites or earth. It's going to drive me crazy. I'll just like do a frame in the video where like it pops up what they're actually called, but they're very similar to these kind of midges or other like weird kind of creatures that like dwell beneath the surface of Oz. So here and there throughout the series, I think that it became much more of an afterthought as, you know, things progressed with the prequels and the sequels. But I think the Oz connection is actually quite strong. You know, I think that there's something there to it.
It is interesting. It's kind of fun to see. I've mentioned this before. It's like there's so many, like in every like fandom, not in every fandom, but in so many fandoms, like, oh, this is where Lucas stole all his ideas from Star Wars. Because we were watching me and my wife have been watching the Boba Fett TV show, and she's like, why do the Sand people wear those goggles and masks? And I've never really, I've read about Dune, but I haven't read Dune.
Right.
And but I know a couple things about it. I was like, well, I think they're based on the people that, you know, from the Dune novels. You have the giant worms. Probably keep like the sand out of their eyes and their mouths, you know. But like then for some reason Luke doesn't have to wear it, you know.
Right.
And just so on and so. But I was just like kind of telling her, you know, basically Star Wars is like kind of like a sci-fi mixtape. And you know, you're bringing up Oz now, which is obviously like hugely influential because it was such a big movie of its time. We'll talk about some of the other, you know, I think that might be a good way to kind of go back to where it started to end this episode.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is Hidden Fortress, because that's where he got some of the original story structure for Star Wars from. You know, you talked about C-3PO and R2-D2. Well, they were like the two peasant characters from Hidden Fortress, right? They're like these kind of just ordinary people that kind of got to witness and go along on a fantastic adventure. They're just two crummy droids that happened to go along on this amazing adventure. Ben Kenobi was the samurai general and Princess Leia. So those were like essentially the four original characters of Star Wars. And you know, I was just thinking through earlier today about Jack Kirby's Fourth World in Star Wars. You know, the planet Apocalypse looks very similar to the Death Star, including that like big, you know, and the big circle has flame coming out of it on Apocalypse, but it's where the blast comes from on the Death Star. Obviously, the name of the main villain is Darkseid. Right. Giveaway. Yeah. His son is the main protagonist. He uses a power called the Astro Force. There's a power called the Source, which helps guide them and gives them premonitions, but it's a very mysterious power they can't fully control or understand. Right. You know, that's just some of it there. And then you obviously have the Flash Gordon connection, the title crawl, the sword, you know, kind of the sword fencing, although that also comes from the samurai movies of Akira Kurosawa. And what are some of the Dune?
Right. Well, you know, with Dune, it starts off with the desert planet. Definitely some of the literary sci-fi is definitely an influence. You know, even like The Lensman by E. Doc Smith, which obviously served more as an inspiration for Green Lantern, of course. But, you know, the Jedi being guardians of peace and justice throughout the galaxy, the Lensmen were sort of the same thing. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series obviously deals with far future stuff, but the center of like galactic culture was the planet Trantor. And Trantor was an entire city covering one planet, and that's Coruscant. You know what I mean? So there's definitely like little nudges and little touches like all throughout. And you know, obviously with the Dune, going back to Dune, mentats and people with these sort of heightened mental and physical abilities, including like prescience and things like that, seeing the future, seeing the past. And the Bene Gesserit using the voice to control people's minds. That's very similar to a Jedi mind trick. So, you know, and going back to the Hidden Fortress, which you mentioned, of course, that's actually name checked in, you know, Episode 4, A New Hope. You know, not all your powers nor your clairvoyance have allowed us to find the rebels' hidden fortress. You know, it's like, hush, you don't mention that movie. I mean, so there's definitely something to it. It's syncretic. It's a mishmash of all these different things. And, that's the beauty of it. Just like you said, Kill Bill's like the ultimate kung fu mixtape. Star Wars it's a sci-fi
Well,
mixtape.
it kind of reminds me of, I wish I could cite the source of this, and I haven't. I read a story. Jack Kirby was very friendly toward fans who would come and visit him and other pros. He'd kind of, his wife would make them sandwiches and stuff. Anyway, like one of them said that he was like a budding young writer, and Kirby was a voracious reader. He
Hmm.
read nonfiction, he read fiction, but he was
Hmm.
just since he was a little kid, he loved the pulps. He loved science
Right.
fiction writing, and he pointed at his big wall of pulps and paperbacks and said to the guy, "Kid, don't knock yourself out trying to think of an original idea. Just do your take on someone else's idea." And
Absolutely.
I guess that's a lesson that George Lucas took to heart. It's interesting too because Tom Scioli, I just listened to his podcast, the Total Recall show, and I can't remember which one. I think it was like maybe a Ray Bradbury, some novelist, but basically he was like, this novel is where, ironically, it was on one of the Star Wars episodes of Total Recall show, but this novel is where Kirby probably got the idea for The Watcher.
Okay. Okay.
That's
I
the
guess.
thing. That's probably one of the big mysteries of Kirby to me, and I've tried to like put it out there. I've tried to ask Mark Evanier online. I'm like, what were his favorite novels? Who were his
Yeah.
favorite writers? I want to
Yeah.
know. I because that to me, he's so fantastic. A lot of his ideas are fantastically imaginative, but something like a character like Galactus is like incredibly imaginative in the world of comic books in the 1960s. But I have to imagine that within the world of science fiction writing, it
Right.
probably wasn't that innovative or incredible an
Right.
idea. They'd probably seen stuff like that since the 40s. There's just Jack. Jack was just bringing it with his inimitable visual style to the world of comic books. So I'm just so curious, like, what did he like? And I don't want to take this off too far off of Star Wars, but
Oh, it's not though, because it's a good point. It's like, here's the thing, for how well known the man is, for how, just like Star Wars provides you with like endless amounts of material to talk and discuss and chew over, Jack Kirby's another one of those same kind of phenomena. This person where you can just pour over every detail and every story and every little nook and cranny, trying to like ferret out like these secrets of the creation of these great concepts. And it's like, how could this man, biographies and stuff are written about him, people discuss music today. How is it that there was never, and I feel like it's got to be there somewhere, but how was there never one decent picture of his bookshelf?
yeah, there is a picture of his bookshelf. I don't know that you can make out any books on it, but I think they're all like history books
Right.
because
Well,
he read a lot about mythology and yeah, I mean
history.
he had so
Yeah.
many books that at one point I don't know that this is the case anymore, but Jeremy Kirby, his grandson, he has like a kind of a side business where he sells like prints and
Mm.
reproductions of his. But I guess early on in the business, he would just send people random paperbacks that Jack Kirby owned because there were just so many of
Wow.
them that he would
Wow.
just like, all right, here, just with an order, I might randomly toss in something
Right.
Jack actually owned. If he was still doing that, I'd probably be ordering from him
Oh,
every
well, who
chance.
wouldn't, right?
Right,
I
I'd love to
mean,
have like one item Kirby owned, but you know. I'm just so curious, like who were. I can't believe that's not because usually when you have a major artist, like people cover their influences, and we know
well,
that like obviously Alex
history is
Raven, Hal
important.
Foster.
History is important, and I could believe that Jack Kirby read a lot of history. And I mean, even if you look at it, we talk about all of those fictional influences on like Lucas's stuff. Obviously World War II, fighter pilot movies, things like that. But World War II is obviously a huge influence on Star Wars. The Nazi and fascistic elements of the
Right,
empire,
yeah.
right down to the little suits and the caps and like
Well,
torturing
that
people
whole
and stuff.
that's there was like a specific movie that was cited. So basically, it was a movie. There's a Death Star run, but there was this movie about like a World War II. There's like a
Dam
German
Busters.
base. Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Mhm. The Dam
that's where it
Busters.
was from. And
Yep.
they were like, I guess like the Death Star run was inspired by a World War II movie. I think you said it was the Dam Busters.
Hmm. Yep.
So it is really interesting, but they were still doing that with the prequels because they were talking about that Ben-Hur
Hmm.
pod race, and what they did was they just took like it didn't even have to be like chariots or cars or anything, just any kind of race, and they were picking angles and stuff. So like they could construct these crude mock-ups of what the race would be like, and they
Right.
give it to the special effects people like this is the movement across the screen we want with the pods.
Hmm.
I thought that was very interesting. So because they were doing it with the original Star Wars, and
Yeah. The
they were
trench
still
run.
doing it 20
Yeah.
years later, finding old movies and like kind of just saying, here, this is we want something like this, which I think is like kind of the essence of a lot of creativity. We're talking about like it seems like when people, like when you and I discuss like the influences on Star Wars, it's just more like the interesting, like, wow, this is such a great thing. Like what led up to its creation. We don't denigrate George Lucas at all.
No,
Whereas it
no.
seems like for a lot of people, it's like trying to like disprove that he was like brilliant or something like that because, oh, well, everyone's the same. This stuff's all out there in the world.
Yeah.
And I remember the artist Joe, I hope I'm pronouncing his name, but Joe Madureira, was talking about
Mhm.
creating an original art style. He's like, well, you draw a nose like John Byrne, and then you draw like some eyes like George Perez, and you draw
Mhm.
muscles like this guy. And, eventually you take all these little influences and you've developed an original style that no one else draws like
Right.
because rather than just copying one specific artist. And I think that's, George Lucas didn't just create a Flash Gordon ripoff.
Right. No,
I mean,
absolutely not.
when you
Yeah.
watch Star Wars, it's because he took from all these different sources. And even if someone was trying to be 100% original, they would probably fail because their subconscious would pull in stuff that they didn't even
Yeah.
realize they were taking. There is nothing that can just come from nothing, especially something within a genre, because
Yeah.
by its very nature, a genre is set on existing conventions.
Well, we've talked about it before, just, in other episodes of our podcast. We even talked about it in this one, even last episode. I mean, there's just something about wanting to kind of explore the roots or the precursors or the forebears
Yeah.
of a particular idea that you love a lot, and when you and I go into it, I don't ever get that impression at all that we're trying to like kick somebody or
Oh,
prove that the
yeah.
idol has feet of clay. There's a million people on the internet that are more than willing and ready to do that. Like right now, they're doing it right now as we're talking.
Right.
And that's the thing though, is that like I'm not setting you or I up on any kind of level where we're as brilliant as all these people, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jack Kirby, George Lucas, whatever. But I mean, what am I going to do? Sit here and like, oh yeah, I've traced like all these things. If this is where he's got his ideas from. See, he's not brilliant. I mean, I can look and do that with my own work. I can look at a drawing that I draw and be like, oh, well, I ripped off drawing like this from this guy,
Right.
or I like these sort of elements in my stories because of this guy, and this guy. It's like
Yeah, someone's got to build the
artist,
road
yeah,
that you drive on.
yeah, every artist and every creator is the sum total of their influences, and there's no shame in that.
I saw this one. I don't know if it was The Tick. It was some animated show like from the '90s, where they went back in time and they found the woman. It was a woman who invented the wheel. She had this like massive lawsuit going on with everyone
Right,
that was owed all these royalties from the use of
right.
the wheel.
That
Yeah,
sounds like something that would be on the Tick.
yeah. So it's just like there's so few people that can genuinely come up with, and it's really
Right.
like opportunity and circumstance is a big part of it
Yeah.
as well. So I just wanted to put that in there that we're not trying to,
Oh
just
no.
because George Lucas had influences, every single creator of anything ever had influences he or she was pulling from.
Well, I'll steal something from some other particular work. I mean, something I definitely saw in a comic, probably something I've also read in a book. But here's the thing: we wouldn't have spent this much time, we wouldn't have devoted this much conversation to something if we didn't really love it. And the thing
Yeah.
is the people that do piss on it, the people that really are, uh, Lucas is this, that, he's a hack, he's a thief, whatever, those people that are doing that, I ultimately believe that at the root of it, it's like at the root of hate, there's still love. You loved something once upon a time, and now you're mad about it for whatever reason. And it's like, so that hate,
No one hates more Star Wars more than Star Wars fans.
right?
That's the
Exactly.
old
That hate is the dark side of love. That is the dark
good.
side, right?
You,
Yes, yes.
Lucas is
Yeah,
saying that as he's counting his cash.
right,
Yeah, you're still talking about it. Thanks for
right.
keeping it out there and putting money in my
Yes,
pocket.
keep me relevant. Yes, yes. I
It
mean,
strengthens you.
well, and it's just funny, but you're right. Nobody hates Star Wars like Star Wars fans, but I've gone through all that. I feel like people that get stuck in that mode, that's ultimately like a very kind of adolescent sort of, I hate my parents kind of vibe. You know what I mean? Like, and it's okay. You go through that. I went through a period of that with Star Wars, but eventually you just got to get back to like, there's fun stuff going on. Like, here's the thing. I love those old Harryhausen movies, right? And you talk about specific visual callbacks. We were talking about the three monsters in the arena and Attack of the Clones. At one point, when Obi-Wan has that spear and he's kind of jabbing it in the face of
Oh,
that
yeah, I
praying
thought the
mantis
same
thing,
thing. Yep.
it's like it's just like the one where they're kind of they're jabbing the spear in the face of like the Cyclops centaur thing in one of the Sinbad movies. It's just such an immediate callback that, like, if you don't know it and you didn't see those films and they're not important to you, you're never going to really care, or it's not going to diminish your enjoyment of it in any way, but it enhances the enjoyment of it for me, because I'm like, oh yes,
Another Easter egg.
yeah. I mean, I love all the Wilhelm screams, like that. Yeah, you know what a Wilhelm scream is, right?
No, I don't know.
It's a scream from an old Western where a dude like got shot in the leg by an arrow. And there's just something particular to the quality of that guy's scream. It's just so kind of like over the top and outrageous that movie makers put that scream into other movies. Lucas loves that Wilhelm scream. It's in so many films. And Spielberg loves it too. It's in the Indiana Jones movies. It's in like every Star Wars film that's been made. There's at least like one Wilhelm scream in it. And when we get done, just go on YouTube and just look up like Wilhelm scream compilation, and it's just so funny, just over and over. And it's like, Wilhelm scream.
Oh, it's just one of the as soon as you type in Wilhelm, it comes up here.
I know, because like there's a billion of the damn things.
All right, here we go.
And like, and I got to tell you, one of my proudest moments as a father, my middle kid.
I know that scream.
Yeah, everyone knows that scream. But the thing is, one of my proudest moments as a father, I was sitting watching a movie at one point, and my middle kid, Maggie, she was like, "Oh, Daddy, that's that scream." And like, I hadn't told her about it. I hadn't like primed her. She's just like, "I heard that scream in another movie."
Wow.
I'm like, that's right, baby.
You do hear that. I've heard that a million times, but it never registers,
Yeah, man, the Wilhelm scream. And it's like, so it's just there. And it's like, if it doesn't register, it doesn't take anything away. But if you do, like, that little momentary callback, that either visual or audio kind of thing, that extra little bit of icing on the cake, and that's just what makes it fun.
I bet there's probably people though that like, I was into it, but then hearing that scream takes me out of it. It reminds me I'm watching a movie.
Whatever. It's like, man, just do me a favor, take yourself out of it. Like, there's the window. Like, line starts at 7 a.m. Jump out. I don't know, man. I mean, it's so cool to be jaded.
You know what fandom is right now? It just feels like everyone's so damn spoiled, Everyone's so spoiled. Like the geeks have inherited the earth.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting everything. There's Star Wars. Could you imagine a Star Wars TV show when you were a kid? Like, not just another movie, but just a TV show like The Mandalorian. That never. I mean, the effects are like movie quality.
Yeah.
Oh, and just one more thing too, I guess. Before, I never saw the Star Wars Christmas special.
Oh.
But
you have.
It's not available on Disney Plus. But the animated shorts.
Yeah.
With Boba Fett is.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, boy. I wish there were a million more of those things, huh?
I mean, it's fun, man. It's like, listen, there was a time where like you were desperate for it. Like when Mark Hamill like guested on the Muppet Show, you know what I mean? Just like stuff like that. Like that was like anything that you could get. Like, just the briefest cameo, like C-3PO or whatever, was like, it was like seeing the Beatles. And that Star Wars, that Christmas special, that was like your first look at Boba Fett. So, who's this mysterious character?
But that was I know the Christmas special gets, I've never seen it, but it's available freely on YouTube and it gets shat upon.
Yeah.
But that Boba Fett special, man, that was a cool cartoon. I mean, that cartoon was, like I said, I kind of like wished for an animated series set between episodes 4 and 5. And if it looked like that, and apparently George Lucas told the animators, he pulled out some Mobius comics. I wanted to look like this, and he was part owner of a comic store in New York. I understand, so
I could believe it.
in the 70s. So he's very familiar with the world of comics. I mean, just pulling out Mobius out of your hat.
Well,
says it all.
I mean, obviously that was a big influence on heavy metal. So anything that has that kind of that vibe, I'm there for it.
Yeah.
I mean, could you have imagined like from like somewhere in the late 70s? Throughout like the 80s, like a series of And not that it's great quality animation. I mean, there's a lot of anime that puts it to shame, but I'd have watched 3, 4, 5 of those like heavy. If there was a Star Wars movie with that heavy metal style
Oh
rotoscoped
man.
animation, I'd ate that shit up with a spoon,
Yeah,
and asked for more. I mean,
yeah.
so there's just something to it. And, obviously this isn't the final word on it. We're going to finish up our podcast, and there'll probably be a dozen other podcasts that come after us to talk about it. But it's funny because it's just our third, and I guess this will be our fourth episode, but it's almost like we're getting the elephant in the room out of the way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we could have talked about all these other things and had this big build up to like story. Well, let's just go ahead and talk about it. Let's just, share our thoughts or whatever. And, we can, there's so many other weird, like less, I can just guarantee you, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you either already like Sword and Planet. So most of what we're going to bring up is not going to be super obscure or not unknown to you, but sooner or later, we're going to get to something where it's just like weird or it's offbeat or you haven't looked at it or whatever, but like Star Wars ain't the one. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Maybe
Like,
the next one should be weird or offbeat. Maybe it's time we'll throw a curveball and put gore as the next one. Maybe we'll
yeah.
what's that one by Gardner Fox?
Yeah, right. Oh, well, yeah, the Lauren stuff would be good. I mean,
Yeah.
and anything. I mean, I'm even like perfectly willing to go back. I started off like the intro to the last episode. I was like, oh well, we were bad. We didn't do our prep work. We didn't do our homework. So instead of talking about Buck Rogers, we're going to talk about Star Wars. And and that's fine because it's all not, if not necessarily cut of the same cloth. It shares a common ancestry, common roots, and yeah, I mean, but we've got plenty of great things that are coming down the pike. I mean, Den, I think, is going to be another fun one to discuss, and especially because it's got that connection to heavy metal.
I think I'm actually going to be coming back into print. I know just a new edition that was
Yeah.
Ziva Larubia remastered.
Yep.
A French edition. I think it'll be published in English. A lot of Corbin's work will be coming back into print soon, so that would definitely be a fun one.
Yeah,
Fun to if we can figure out when it's going to be released, that we could even sync it.
Yeah, because I mean, it looks good. It's very much its own thing. Obviously, it borrows heavily from the creators' like personal fantasies and obsessions, like everything does. But it's Sword and Planet, but in a lot of ways, it's a very unique kind of Sword and Planet to me.
Oh yeah, well, it almost takes like some of the id of Sword and Planet and dials it up a notch.
Yeah, it does. But that's what's fun. That's part of what's likable about it, because there's an exploitationist aspect to Sword and Planet stuff, and we've discussed that before. There's usually like scantily clad women and violence and slavery and all these like kind of retrogressive concepts that are in it, and that's part of what lends its appeal in a way. I mean, it's got a seaminess of it because part of it is descended from those pulp magazines,
right? Sensationalism.
You gotta love it, man. Gotta love it. But I don't know, this is a good one, man. I think this is good. I think we kept it succinct, and I'll probably,
I don't know if we kept it succinct.
Well, I don't know that we. I don't know. I think we kept it more succinct than the last one.
Yeah. I think we ran the almost. I was actually wondering what we were even going to talk about on this one.
Well, it's like
we filled up like a couple hours.
I know, man, but it's like I was going through it, like trying to find places where I could trim it, and it's just like I just didn't have the heart to cut a whole lot out of it, man. I was like, my God, this is like a monster long like podcast episode, but like we're having fun. And I mean, isn't that
right?
I don't know. I guess like I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but the ones that I do, it's generally people that enjoy what they're talking about. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to listen to something just so it can be like Debbie Downer and like the bad time game.
Do you remember our prequel conversation?
Yeah. It wasn't that bad though, was it? I don't know.
I don't know. We were talking about now. We probably spent an hour at least.
Like all over it.
I don't want to. There's a lot to like about it, but we're not going to talk about that.
I guess, man. I mean, that I'll have to like re-listen to it. It's a long podcast though, so like I did one listen through to like cut out some unnecessary stuff, some gaps and some dead air. but it's long enough that like it would be a real bear to like have to listen to it again.
Oh,
Like, I'll
there's
just
no
leave that to
greater
our
endorsement.
yeah.
It
I'll
would
just
be a bear to listen.
that's the thing though. The whole time we were talking about it, yeah, we talked about what we didn't like. We talked about what we thought could be done better, but I feel like the love shines through. We're having
Yeah.
fun with it. We're trying to
I feel like we've probably spent enough money on Star Wars junk over the years
yeah,
that we've earned the right
yeah,
to
yeah.
take to share a few qualms, and I'm sure Lucas will never hear it, so who cares?